Hello, everyone, and welcome to Overtime. Thank you for joining us. With me today is Ethan Prolib. Ethan, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. I'd be doing a little better if the system was running.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We're not gonna sit here and revisit. Fortunately, there aren't too many people outside of my immediate family who knows. Like, one of you were doing a stream not that long ago, and there was no audio. And I may know people who may have been giving you some shit for it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, one or two.
yeah, myself perhaps included. So.
Hmm.
We are switching to vMix, which is a much more powerful form of software than what we use, but it's also a lot harder to configure. The Murphy's Law, actually, I think it wasn't Murphy's Law. I forget, it was Murphy's Corollary, which is that which works in testing will fail to work in the production environment. We got that. We got everything working. Everything was working beautifully, except for Prolib's sound. He couldn't hear me. I could hear him. Now, I don't mind when my co-host is muted, but I mind very much when they can't hear me. He was like, "This works for me. Let's just go." I go to sleep anyway. I don't really pay attention. So, yeah, it's going to be, and unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to give Ethan here sort of a rundown of what we're going to cover. I think he sort of has a pretty good idea anyway.
A little bit.
Of what we're going to be covering. It's a number of things. I also do want to show some video. We are back on our old system, which is functioning just fine, much to my surprise. But none of the video or anything that we need is really in place for that. So what I'm going to do is try to get some of that in place while we're doing the show, so that you guys can see what it is that we're going to be talking about today. So let's start. Washington, D.C. Sometimes people think of it as a state. Of course, it is not a state. It is a district. This has sparked a lot of people shouting about, and what we'll do is, Ethan, I'll cover sort of all the stuff, and then we'll go and dissect it bit by bit, because I think there's a lot to cover. It sparked charges of taxation without representation. D.C., just like Puerto Rico, has nearly all of the responsibilities of statehood, including taxation and the military draft, with very few benefits. It has no senators and only one representative in Congress, and that representative cannot vote on the floor. In landmark legislation today, passed by a vote of 232 to 118, the House of Representatives has pushed a bill granting the District of Columbia statehood. However, of course, this does have to pass the Senate. This is largely a partisan issue. All the Democrats but one voted for this. However, it is believed that Senate Republicans, the vast majority of whom oppose D.C. statehood, will just ignore the bill. If it is passed, Donald Trump has promised to veto it. There remains, even now, despite some pervasive denials about systemic problems in America's police forces, denials that somehow this obvious and escapable fact that any discussion about this isn't an attempt to undermine the hundreds of thousands of good police officers out there. It's a false dichotomy. We can and should acknowledge those hard-working and dedicated police officers in this country, and we can, while still acknowledging a pervasive and persistent culture which shields many officers against abuse of both the trust and power given to them by the communities which they have been hired to serve. On June 4th, Martin Gugino walked up to riot police in Buffalo, New York. He was 75 years old and walked up only to talk to them. We are going to see now if I can show you that footage.
He is leaking! He's out of his ear! He's bleeding out of his ear! He's bleeding out of his ear! Get him medic! What the fuck you walking up on me? I'm on the ground! Get the fuck away! Y'all don't want this shit!
apologize. Yes, I should have warned. I was in the middle of trying to sort of prepare for that and streamline that as we're going. That is what happened to Martin Gugino on June 4th. He was unarmed. He was 75 years old. We've heard some defenses. Well, hey, you know, it was just a push. It was, you don't push a 75-year-old man. I'm half that, and I can already tell I'm reaching the point where I'm reasonably easy to knock over, and you know, a 75-year-old person doesn't recover from wounds like that. He is currently still in the hospital. He has a fractured skull. It was hopeful that he might be able to go home this week. He will not. He also cannot walk yet. The initial police report said that he tripped and fell while backing away from police officers. This is obviously a lie. When the two officers involved were suspended as a result of just the allegations of wrongdoing, they were suspended pending an investigation. 57 of the other officers in the riot unit resigned in protest of the investigation and of their suspension. Both of these men, the two officers, Aaron Torglasky and Robert McCabe, have since been charged with second-degree assault and remain suspended without pay. Meanwhile, 3 officers in Wilmington, North Carolina, were fired yesterday after footage showed them engaging in racist and threatening comments. This included multiple uses of the N-word, and one officer saying that he was planning on buying an assault rifle and that it was his hope for a civil war against the anti-racist protesters whom he said were, quote, worshiping blacks. The same officer also accused his police department of, quote, kneeling down with the black folks. Cases of excessive force continue, including a 56-year-old black male who, after cashing a payday loan, was questioned by police officers on an suspicion of panhandling. He matched the description of a suspect in the area. When he denied it was him and suggested that they go to the payday store and confirm that he goes there every single week. And after he refused to answer any further questions, an officer came up from behind him and tackled him to the ground. This broke his arm. While his arm was broken, they continued to engage in the arrest and handcuffed him, one arm broken, while he was lying on the ground. Again, I don't mean to say that by any means that this is all or even most of the police, but to suggest that this can continue, this is an untenable situation. It's been untenable for a very long time. That's why, and as Prolib you had pointed out, it was Martin Luther King Jr., believe it or not. Riots are the voices of the is the voice of the oppressed. I think that was it. Is that the correct quote? Oh, now I can't hear you. I don't know if that's your bad or my bad. I'll blame you. I heard you earlier. I've got nothing coming in on the. Wait a minute. Somebody may be muted. I don't know if it's okay. We're just going to have problems. This has no sound coming in on the capture for you. I'll give you a second to, yeah. All right, we will see if we can get that sorted out, and he is back. Hopefully,
yeah, Mike, I decided to reset all of my sound settings just as you asked me a question.
Oh, good. Good.
Yes.
Technology today is...
Technology today is just wonderful. So riots are the language of the unheard.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
And then, of course, because this is one of the reasons we do want to switch out of OBS is because it does on occasion. It's been recently locking up. We've had images freezing like you just saw there. So we'll work on it. We do appreciate your patience. The White House Coronavirus Task Force has held its first public briefing in nearly 2 months. At the Department of Health and Human Services, as the number of coronavirus cases increasing in states or states with increasing coronavirus cases has topped 30. At that meeting, Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that Trump has not spoken with the committee regarding COVID and the pandemic in at least 2 weeks. The European Union has said it will now block travelers from the United States and Russia in light of the COVID cases. We showed a graphic earlier, and I did want to show it again if I can get it back up. And let me just double check. I do believe I have it, although this may be one of the lower resolution. Oh, yep, I do have it. So, despite the fact that the United States has a smaller population than the EU, we do have a much larger number of people with COVID, and this translates to per capita. For every million people, you can see Brazil is the highest. The United States is threatening to catch up to Brazil, and all of the other countries are going down significantly. This is due largely to a mismanagement. We won't talk about which tangerine-colored administrative official may be mismanaging things. I'm sure we will get to that. Texas is one of the last states to close and one of the first to reopen. It's been hit extraordinarily hard. Governor Greg Abbott has said he is halting the reopening of the state and is ordering the closing of all bars and outdoor recreational facilities. He is also lowering the indoor capacity of restaurants and has suspended elective surgeries as of yesterday. He is saying that he's directing all hospitals to postpone anything that's non-essential as long as possible. He's postponing anything non-essential so that they can focus on saving the victims of coronavirus. While just 9 days ago, he touted their state's abundant, quote, that's a quote there, hospital capacity. Now, most of the hospitals in Texas are nearing or have exceeded that capacity. One ICU in Houston has reported 120% of capacity. The Texas Medical Center, normally between 70 and 80% capacity, reached 100% capacity yesterday. Both Florida and Texas are reinstituting some form of lockdown and have asked people to stay home. The governor of Texas has also said that unless it's an emergency, you should not be leaving your house. Florida has now closed the beaches and has banned the consumption of alcohol across all bars. I'm not sure I get that. They haven't closed the bars, just the consumption of Okay, somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has fallen 730 points, or 2.8%, on this news. Columbia University has found that if New York had started social distancing just 1 week earlier, more than 22,000 deaths in the New York area could have been prevented. And finally, Wendell Potter, former VP of Corporate Communications for Cigna Healthcare, came out with the following message on Twitter yesterday. Quote, amid America's COVID-19 disaster, I must come clean about the lie that I spread as a health insurance executive. We spent big money to push the idea that Canada's single-payer system is awful and the U.S. system is much better. It was a lie. And the nation's COVID response has proved the truth. Canada is doing much better than the U.S. when it comes to COVID-19 testing and treatment. On a per capita basis, more Canadians are being treated and tested, and fewer are getting sick and dying. This may shock Americans who still believe the lies that I told about the Canadian healthcare system. Here's the truth. Our industry PR and lobbying group, AHIP, supplied my colleagues and me with cherry-picked data and anecdotes to make people think Canadians wait endlessly for their care. It's a lie, and I will always regret the disservice I did to folks on both sides of the border. In Canada, nobody gets turned away from doctors due to a lack of funds. In America, exorbitant bills are the defining feature of our system. What about the quality of care? When it comes to COVID-19, there have been about 21 deaths per 100,000 in Canada. 21 deaths. Versus 34 per 100,000 in the U.S. Remember, in Canada, there are no copays, deductibles, or co-insurance ever. Care is free at the point of service, and those laid off in Canada don't face worry of losing their health insurance. In the U.S., millions are losing their jobs and coverage and are scared to death. You learn a lot about a healthcare system when a global crisis hits, and different nations have different results. Canada's single health payer system is saving lives, and the U.S. profit-driven corporate model is failing. I'll regret the slandering Canadian system for the rest of my life. And that should get you guys updated over what's been going on since our last update 2 days ago. Welcome aboard, Ethan. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start at the top. If that's cool with you, I mean, we can start wherever you want. But if we start at the top, DC statehood.
Well, I think that when you talk about DC statehood, you also need to talk about statehood for Puerto Rico, for American Samoa, for Guam, for all of our territories, and anything that is an incorporation of the United States that does not have the rights and privileges of statehood. And the reason why none of those places will become states is because if they become states, each of them will get 2 senators. And all of those areas are overwhelmingly Democratic, and you will add Democratic senators to the Senate. And the Republicans are not going to let that happen because they have a very slim margin. If they added Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico tomorrow, they would be the minority. Much less Guam, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands. So while they deserve it, it's not going to happen as long as Republicans can prevent it. And that breaks my heart because those people deserve statehood. There's no reason why they shouldn't have the ability to be a state, except for that Republicans want to keep a very slim grasp on some pieces of power. What was next?
Well, I think, violence, police violence. This includes what happened yesterday with what was actually a hot mic incident. The officers did not realize that their cams were recording. They were speaking to each other about hoping for a race war. One of them wanted, or a civil war. One of them, that was some pretty. Yeah.
There's a picture of a young man that's been going around. I saw it on Reddit originally, and he's holding a sign. Young African American man. He's holding a sign that says, "We're not trying to start a race war. We're trying to end one." I know I've said it here before, and I've said it on my own channel too. But right now, I think that the best thing that people that look like you and I can do is listen to people who are minorities and amplify their voices and put their voices forward. I support protest in any and all its forms, even protests I disagree with. I think it's a very important right. And whatever minorities, the leaders in those minority communities say we need to do is what we need to do, because this cannot continue. We over incarcerate, we over prosecute, we over arrest, and we brutalize minorities and poor people in this country. And poor people are stuck, and they are kept poor by fines and taxes, so that there will be poor people, so that rich people can stay rich. And that is the system that you have, and that's why for so long it's been just fine that there's been white nationalists, white supremacists inside police departments across the country. We've all known about it. This isn't a mystery. No one's surprised when you say, "Oh, a bunch of cops said the N-word." Everybody's like, "Well, yeah, they're cops. Of course, cops are going to say the N-word. That cops hate black people like that. Like you just assume that. Like, yeah, cops hate black people. That's how it is." So no one's surprised by that. It's just that it's never been called out before. Cops have for generations been protected, and they've had laws passed, but precedent has been set in a lot of places that has done nothing but protect police officers from accountability. Cops have stolen things from suspects. And when I say suspect, I don't mean people that have been arrested. I just mean they can be like, "Oh, you have some cash in your car? Well, There's no way for me to know whether or not that cash was going to be used to commit a crime. So I'm going to assume that it was, and I'm going to take it. And you're like, well, but it wasn't. They're like, well, have fun proving that in court. And then they can just take your money from you. It's called civil forfeiture. It's a thing. The fact that we live in a society in which civil forfeiture exists and we haven't done anything about it should embarrass everyone who lives in the society. If you are a United States citizen and you are not doing anything to try to counteract or get rid of civil forfeiture, shame on you. Shame on you, because it's disgusting and abhorrent. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no. Don't apologize. I think you're right. I had a friend of mine in California who let his friend borrow a truck. His friend used the truck in a robbery. He was driving his truck when he got pulled over, and he was arrested for that robbery. He didn't do it, but they took the truck, and they got to keep the truck. He couldn't get the truck back. He had marijuana on him when they pulled him over. So because probable cause allowed them to get around the so if they had a warrant and they found the marijuana, unless the marijuana was on the warrant, they couldn't do anything. But because they had probable cause on the robbery, they could bust him on the marijuana. So he did a brief stint, and when he got out, no truck, no car, couldn't get a job, couldn't do, and then that's just and we've covered the what's a lot of what's wrong with the U.S. prison system, and that's one of them, which is once you're in it, it's designed to manufacture criminals. It's designed to keep people in it, it's an absolute horrific system. But I will push back on only one thing you said. I couldn't agree more on anything. I couldn't agree more with everything, with one exception, which is I didn't know. I grew up in a white privilege is something that I think needs to be talked about. It's hard to talk about because it's one of the privileged ones. It's an awkward and uncomfortable conversation. But you know, I somebody had pointed out, and I thought this was worth noting. And white privilege doesn't mean you haven't had a hard life. It just means that you've had some things easier than other people, and just because of the color of your skin. I grew up in a largely white high school and reasonably wealthy community. The police officers there, were kind and courteous. I still would never talk back to them, but nonetheless, I didn't believe half the stories that I heard. And I do think there's a segment of people who sit there and don't believe that it's really this bad. I think it's very hard for a number of white people. No, officers using the N-word, no, they're respectful. And in some communities there are. And if you grew up in a community like that, congratulations. I'm really happy for you. You lucked out. You got the lottery ticket, really, because you grew up by nothing other than the parents you were born to. That's it.
Right.
But if you got that lottery ticket, great. But part of having that lottery ticket is making sure that you understand that it was just a lottery ticket. It wasn't by nature of anything you did. You were born on third base. Some people think that they were born on third base, like, wow, I'm on third base, I'm really lucky. What can I do to help everyone else out? And some people think they were born on third base because they hit a triple. And I think I do think there are a lot of. I think you're right. There are a lot of people who have been aware that we've had more of a problem, and they don't talk. It doesn't affect them. So if it doesn't affect them, But I think there are a lot of people. I think the ignorance. I've been ignorant of it until probably my early 20s. I think so. And even now, it's still a bit of to watch that video that we showed, and to what the idea that you could push a 75-year-old man, an unarmed 75, that you could give him that kind of shove, could easily have killed him. Wouldn't have killed me. Wouldn't have killed most people. But if you don't know that and you're a police officer, if you don't realize that you cannot treat somebody of that age like, oh, dear Lord. And that one in particular, because I've seen a few people defending that one too. And it's just like, well, he was not a 75. No.
Right. And, it's about, it's a society that still has the Virginia battle flag on the Mississippi state flag. It's a society where just a few days ago, they finally took the John C. Calhoun statue down in Charleston, South Carolina. That happened a few days ago. It wasn't just a statue either. It was a statue on top of a building, on top of a huge tower, whatever that would be, obelisk. Overlooking the entire area was John C. Calhoun. If you don't know who John C. Calhoun is, he's one of the most fervent and adamant arguers for slavery in the history of the United States. He firmly believed that black people were not equal to white people. He firmly believed that slavery was the only thing that black people were capable of doing. He didn't think that they were capable of taking care of themselves if they weren't slaves. That's what John C. Calhoun believed. And here he is looking out over Charleston, South Carolina, his statue. That's the society that you live. You can try to ignore it. You can say, "Oh no, not me." Well, I grew up in an African American neighborhood, The issue is the society that we have today is failing a large part of our communities. And the other problem is that we still have this segregation mindset in our heads that there is a black America and a white American, an Asian American, and a gay American, all this different stuff. And because we think about it in all these divisions, it's easy for us to put these wedges in, right? We don't think about the fact that we're supposed to be a cohesive whole. We have lost that, especially since Trump has been president. We have totally lost the idea that Shelby Foote. Do you know who Shelby Foote is, the author?
Sounds familiar, but no.
Shelby Foote famously wrote about the Civil War. His book on the Civil War is considered the book on the Civil War. And Shelby Foote once said, "The Civil War happened because Americans forgot how to do what we are best at, and that's compromise. Americans are great at compromise. And when we forgot how to compromise, we had a civil war." And I've always loved that quote from Shelby Foote, because the spirit of American ingenuity hasn't just been industrial. It has been societal. It has been governmental. It has been structural. We haven't lived up to it, right? We haven't lived up to it. I'm not saying that we have, but I'm saying that we have the capability to do so if we can listen to one another. And if we can recognize that we have not been living up to our responsibility, which is to make sure that everyone has a fair shot, has a fair chance, and has a fair start. Right now, that's not how it is. And until it is that way, we're gonna be exactly where we are right now.
And I would like to add to those conservatives who, for whatever reason, it seems to me to be the conservatives who have decided that compromise is weakness. That's a reasonably new conservative position. I will say this. For those who think that the Constitution is just one step shy of a new chapter in the Bible, and I'm not kidding when I say that, because there are people who really do think it is literally inspired by the God of Abraham.
Yes.
I would like to say that every clause, every sentence, every paragraph, every word, every piece of punctuation in the Constitution all have one thing in common. One thing in common. They were all a compromise. Every single one. And they were fought over by people who just fought and fought and fought until they compromised. And that's how it got done. And it wouldn't have gotten done any other way. And that was the point. And they set it up so that we would have to continue to compromise. And the reason we are in deadlock now is because one side has decided that compromise is weakness. And if they want to go ahead believing that, they can, but they cannot continue to believe that and say that that's what the founding fathers would have wanted, because that is the antithesis of what they wanted and how they functioned and how they set up this government. And they set it up to do what it's doing now, if one side decides to do that, which is to stop working. End of lecture.
No, you're absolutely correct.
Again, but yeah.
The Federalists, especially at the convention, wanted to make sure that legislation happened very, very slowly.
Yes.
and that that's why Congress gets to decide what the laws are and holds the purse strings, because they wanted a legislative body that would establish a budget that wouldn't change very much from year to year. That was intentional. It's also why the executive doesn't really have purse string powers. The executive can kind of move some money around within different departments, but when Congress says there's $1 billion going to this department, there's $1 billion going to that department, and the executive can't really do much about that. They can do stuff within the department to rearrange the funds, but they can't take it from one bucket and put into another bucket. Only Congress can do that. That's why the president proposes a budget to Congress, and Congress usually tells them no and sends them theirs. It's also, I hate to bring this up, but the reason why the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, first of all, and is in the Constitution, is because states like South Carolina were like, I don't think this is going to work out. So what's our fail-safe? If this whole thing doesn't work out and you guys start doing something funky and we want out, we want to make sure that we can protect ourselves and our families. That's what the Second Amendment was for, was so that the states themselves could raise their own militias. I'm not talking about precedent and how it's been found today and people can own bazookas, whatever. I'm talking about originally the purpose of the Second Amendment was so that the states, if they thought that the government was setting up a new king, could raise a militia and protect themselves. That was very, very important to states like South Carolina, Georgia.
Wait. I don't think there's any evidence of that, Ethan. I don't think. It's not like the word militia is in the Second Amendment, Ethan. I mean,
what's funny? You bring up edits, and when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and took it back to the Continental Congress, they made 82 edits. Can you imagine? Like, Thomas Jefferson spent like a week in this sweltering room. Of course, there was no air conditioning or anything back then. Writing this whole document, gives it to these people, and they change it 82 times. He can't do a thing about it. That must have been so infuriating. Like, what are you people talking? What are you doing? Anyway, you reminded me of that. So.
We're gonna actually, we have a Zandering person who I really like. He's been a big supporter of the show for quite some time. He's a good guy. He is actually conservative, and he's got some very good. So here's a fact which you know, which a number of people who know me know, which is I own a humanist. Social networking and resource site called the Humanist Codex. It's a resource of arguments, and it's got also social networking for humanists, atheists, and even theists who are looking to just try to understand these positions better. On the day that I bought it was first called the Atheist Codex. On the day that I bought the atheistcodex.com, I bought a second domain name. It was called the guncontrolcodex.com because I was going to do, and it was sort of like, which one do I want to do first? And I said, I'll get them both done in about a year. 2 years later, the Humanist Codex is still getting edited and revised. I still haven't done it, but that was one of the other positions. So Zandering and I are going to have a very good discussion on it. I don't think it's going to be a debate. It's going to be a discussion, and he's got with some of the better arguments I've heard, and he's not someone too straw man. So I think we're going to have that. I think a week from Tuesday, and
that sounds great.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a good discussion.
Yeah.
And then we had talked about the statue. That reminded me of Willie Lynch, who was a real person. Willie Lynch. That's where we get the term lynching from. And he did a speech and he was very similar to Calhoun. Lynch did a speech on how to treat slaves and why, if you cared about your slaves, you did treat them that way because they couldn't take care of themselves. So Calhoun was not very different from that. And I had heard this, and I wasn't able to get this done by the time we aired, but I do know that there's something, maybe someone in the live chat can fill us in. I do know that Trump has said he's going to sign an order stopping the pulling down of a number of historic landmarks. I don't know what authority he's got to do that.
Right. I mean, if the states themselves... the federal government has no authority over the states. And the only thing I can think of is that if it's a national park or a national historic site, like he has the power to direct. he has the power to direct the Department of the Interior to declare certain sites or to propose certain sites as national monuments, but then Congress has to approve it or something. It's a convoluted process. I forget how exactly it works, and I think that's what they're going to go for. Is they're going to try to declare them national monuments.
Oh, gee. Well, if they get them down beforehand, good luck. That's a slow process, but who knows? They'll probably fast track it. Yeah, because you got to do important stuff when national until the U.S. catches up with Brazil on that little thing there. I guess priorities. Yeah, and so that does, I think. All right, so I think there's a lot going on with. I think there are people who know and are quiet about it, and there are people who don't know and don't understand just the level of it's a cultural problem, and the fact that it showed Mr. Gugino when he got pushed, but the fact that such an egregious act, and it was written down as he tripped and fell, and it had to be amended after the fact. Nobody got in trouble for that either, and I don't think it was those two officers who did it. Somebody was covering for the others, and
right, a supervisor or something.
Yeah, and he did not trip and fall, and he was very close to killed, and a fractured skull at 75 is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. All right. First coronavirus meeting a public coronavirus briefing in 2 months from the coronavirus task force, which Trump tried to disband, but public outcry because a few people said this is maybe coming back. The U.S. has topped 40,000 new cases, and which is a record for us, and. It's the high. Oh, well, wait a minute. Let me just get that right. Yeah, 40,173 new cases reported, according to Johns Hopkins University, which was the new record. The previous record was held the day before, which was yesterday, and the previous record, I think, was from the day before that.
Do you know what's happened since the last coronavirus task force meeting?
It's been 2 months. A lot. I can't think of anything. But what's happened?
Well, specifically.
No.
70,000 Americans have died of COVID-19.
Jesus.
I have the pleasure of having some exceptionally intelligent and experienced people in my community. And I was speaking with one of them right before we went on the air, who has a lot of experience with this sort of thing, who was explaining some numbers to me. And here's the thing to think about. If we closed everything down tonight, and we said tomorrow morning, everybody stay in their homes for the next 2 to 3 weeks, the next 2 to 3 weeks would be the worst 2 to 3 weeks of COVID-19 that we've had in this country. We cannot stop the next 2 to 3 weeks happening, no matter what we do. It's going to be very, 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 very bad. We've got governors like mine in South Carolina that are doing nothing. You've got North Carolina. I forgot to share this with you. The North Carolina Republican legislature today inserted into a bill a provision that will make it illegal in the state of North Carolina to wear a face mask starting August 1st.
Oh, dear
Their excuse is an old law that pertains to the KKK, about wearing KKK masks or hoods or something, and they're using that to defend the provision being added into this bill. They're saying, oh, well, we'll pass another bill later that will undo this. That's probably going to be some sort of budgetary bill that has to do with voting and voting precincts, so that it will make the Democrats vote for having fewer voting precincts in November, but people will be able to wear face masks. That is probably the strategy of the North Carolina legislature with this. So as it stands right now, starting August 1st in North Carolina, it will be illegal to wear a face mask in the entire state.
Fauci, I believe it was, said that basically unless 95% of Americans wear face masks, we are not going to have a serious impact on the death rates anytime soon. It's manageable. And this is what gets me is It was never going to be easy. There was always going to be a huge hit to the economy. Always. Mm-hmm. That's not avoidable. The question is, do we take the huge hit to the economy and have, hundreds of thousands of people die, maybe millions, or do we just take the hit to the economy? We can even lessen the hit to the economy because the economy isn't going to get hit as bad if we fix it. As I said the first time, if we finish the course of the lockdown the first time, we can't stop it, but we can flatten it enough that it's manageable. That's what these other countries here have done. Remember where Italy was. Mm-hmm. And do you think their economy is doing better now that they've got it under control or not?
For sure. Yeah.
And we've been managed by a president who said that this wasn't a problem, that it was going to be gone in a couple of weeks, who said that this was a conspiracy from the Democrats, who suggested that perhaps we should look into ways of curing it, like ingesting household cleaners, who has... this is what he has tried to disband every effort, and then said that he has been the greatest president in dealing with this that one could possibly imagine, and he's done everything right. He also recommended a lethal drug that couldn't hurt if you take it with COVID, and aside from the people trying to procure the drug from fish tank cleaners because they were so desperate to try to get something, the people who did take it and had gotten a prescription for it because he forced the FDA to do an emergency authorization for it, it tripled the rate of death for people of COVID-19. Why? Because it turns out that if you're already sick, very, very sick, taking a toxic drug may not be a good idea.
Yeah. I'm exhausted with him. Carly Fiorina, who used to run Hewlett Packard, she came out today, either today or yesterday, said she's voting for Joe Biden. Famous Republican. She's been a steadfast Republican for a long time. Bill Barr a little while ago basically said, if you protest against the United States, we're going to arrest you. There was a memo put out. He's putting together a DOJ task force to investigate anti-government extremists. And we're gonna get to the bottom of who these anti-government extremists are, and we're going to pull apart their networks. And the poll numbers for Trump are very bad. I don't put a lot of credence into polls, but Trump puts a lot of credence into polls. So he's terrified right now. He's terrified, especially after, doing that rally in Tulsa and no one showed up, right? 6,200 people showed up.
Well, I got to interrupt you for 1 second.
Sure.
So nobody showed up. And it turned out that I think it was a South Korean group on TikTok had gotten a whole bunch of seats reserved for them, and they were trying to limit the number of people at the rally. And so somebody pointed this out to the head of communications for that particular
Brad Parscale. Yes.
And the response was, "Oh, they had no impact. The Dems just wish they could have impacted us like that." So his reply was, "No, nobody was able to sabotage the organization. It's just when they found out Trump was coming, nobody wanted to come on their own." That was his defense. I'm sorry. There was something about that. I was like, talk about the dumbest defense I've ever heard.
So something that's funny is they call her the TikTok grandma. She was one of the main leaders of the effort. Joe Biden's campaign hired her yesterday, which I thought was just a troll move on Trump. But yeah, so Trump is looking at these polls. He's looking at these numbers. He's scared. And the only way that they're going to win in November is cheating, right? They have got to get the states to limit polling places, to close down as many as possible. They need as few people voting as possible. That's the only way that they're going to win in November, and they're going to try. They're going to use every effort that they can. We've talked about this before, and I won't go too deep into it, but the federal government can't cancel an election. Trump has no power whatsoever to cancel an election because elections are held by states, and the federal government has no power over elections. States decide how they're conducted and how they're reported and everything. The only thing that the federal government can do is convince states that they need fewer polling places because things are dangerous, because there's a virus that's dangerous, or because there's anti-government extremists that are dangerous.
Or voters that are dangerous.
Sure. So if they can manufacture, an Antifa, like Antifa doesn't exist, but, an Antifa organization that's out to kill everybody at the polls and keep people from showing up. If they can just get fewer people to vote, the Republicans think they can win. That is their strategy, is to keep as many people away from the polls as possible. I think that's one of the reasons why Trump's not doing anything about the virus. He wants this to get very bad. He wants people to be very scared in November. He doesn't want them going out. I think that's why Bill Barr is going to try to. Yeah, I think that's why Bill Barr is going to try to criminalize protesting, so that he can arrest as many people as possible. They are going to bring out every single the dirtiest of dirty tricks. Karl Rove is now helping the Trump campaign. He was just hired a few days ago. If you don't know who Karl Rove is, he was the reason that Bush got elected in both elections. Both of those elections, Gore won the first one and Kerry won the second one. Gore won Florida and Kerry won Ohio. There's plenty of evidence everywhere. There's a whole bunch of books about it and stuff. You can go read those. I don't need to rehash that here. But Karl Rove and Roger Stone pulled a bunch of dirty tricks and pulled enough dirty tricks in enough places to get enough votes not counted so that it looked like Bush won. All right. They're going to try to do the same thing in November. Now, there's a lot of people that fucking hate him, that hate Trump, that are not going to vote for him, that are going to adamantly vote for Joe Biden just to get Trump out. I don't know which side's going to win. I have no idea. Sitting here before you, I don't know. It's gonna be an exceptionally close election due to all of those factors.
I've been trying to figure out why Trump wasn't working harder, because you can see the numbers. And one I heard said that I'm trying not to even talk about it right now because too much is happening. But I heard one that said Trump was down 20 points, which is huge, if you can believe it. But I was trying to figure out. But I was trying to figure out why he's not trying to fix this problem, because it's only going to make his numbers go down. But I think you got a good point. He doesn't know how. Trump has no idea how to. Well, and he doesn't know how.
I'm being serious. Like, I'm not insulting him. It's not an intelligence thing. It's a humility thing. Like, Trump doesn't know how to listen to other people and do what they say. He has no idea how to do that. Yeah. And that's the only way that he's going to be able to win. So, to win fairly. So the only other way that he can win is force. As far as the polls go, I do look at them, even though I don't trust them. I'm still a nerd. I think the actual number is closer to 12. I think nationally, Biden's probably had about 12 points. There's a lot of states in play that should not be in play as far as the Republicans are going, and I'm talking about Texas and Florida, North Carolina, Arizona. There's some evidence that Utah could be in play because the Mormons hate Trump a lot. Can you imagine? California, of course, is going to go for the Dems. But Trump won because he won in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Florida, essentially. If he loses all three of those, there's not a path to 270. Okay? There just isn't. Ohio could be a swing state. Well, Ohio's always a swing state, but it could swing for the Dems. Pennsylvania, it is difficult to see in a fair election how Trump wins. So they're going to play dirty. They're going to play the dirtiest stuff you've ever seen. I've talked about this I have somebody that claims to be in the know. They claim that the Trump campaign has 5 or 6 women ready to come out and say that there was some sort of sexual assault, sexual harassment done to them by Joe Biden. I don't know that is true, but I don't doubt it, because they're going to have to. They're going to have women come out and say that. This is going to be, the election of 1800 was probably the dirtiest election we've ever had. Ben Franklin started like 4 newspapers just to slander Thomas Jefferson. Now, listen, this I shouldn't say slander, but he started a bunch of newspapers just to talk about the fact that Thomas Jefferson had impregnated one of his slaves and had children with her. Okay, it's not slander. It was true. I shouldn't have said slander. But he started a bunch of newspapers just to say that, just so that Jefferson would lose the election. It was very contentious. It was very dirty. And this election will top that. It's going to get very, 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 very gross in about 6 weeks.
Yeah. Speaking of Roger Stone, by the way, appealed his conviction.
Do we have to?
Well, he got 3 years today.
Yeah.
Well, he already had 3 years, but he tried to get out of the 3 years, and he's
right.
Well, I figured I'd bring it up because at least I want
good
news.
Judge Jackson is a fair judge. A lot of people are wanting think that Stone's punishment should be harsher. I don't know. I mean, he's a first-time offender. What he did was egregious. I'm not saying that it wasn't. First-time offender. It's on the lighter side. I would have liked to see about 5 years, but I don't think that 3 years is a slap on the wrist. And let's be honest, Trump's going to pardon him or commute the sentence anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yep. Oh, joy. And so I think, let's see, about the last thing really to talk about, I guess two remaining things to talk about. One is, of course, the state of COVID, which Texas and I mean, Texas has had, and I don't think you were here when we just sort of started covering this. You hadn't joined yet, but no secrets. We sat and we covered the numbers and we said, okay, this is what's going to happen, and this is what's going to happen in Texas. And I said what I told you before, which is it's an interesting phenomenon. These plagues always hit liberals first and then hit conservatives. We talked about this during the science thing. It seems odd, but it does. The reason is because liberals tend to live in cities and higher populated, and that creates liberals because you are exposed to more ideas. That's also a great breeding ground for. And Trump, who sort of said, well, New York is on its own, now sees his base in trouble because now we're seeing Dallas get hit. And so my question was, what's going to happen with Dallas? And if it turns out that he abandons them too, that would not be what I had predicted.
Oh, he's going to abandon. He doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what to do because he won't listen to anybody. He doesn't want to do what Dr. Fauci tells him to do. So he's going to do what Stephen Miller tells him to do. And Stephen Miller's like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Because for Stephen Miller, if 1 million Americans die of COVID-19, that's great. That's wonderful for him because then a bunch of people won't show up and vote.
Well,
so why does he care?
It disproportionately affects the poor and minorities.
Right.
So that's
Yeah. It's sad. It depresses me, but yeah, that's not a mystery.
It depresses me too, and I there's a large part of me that would like to say that that's cynical. Saying that is cynical. Unfortunately, I've had enough experience to suggest that you're right. Unfortunately, I don't think it's. I think it's a factor. I think he's. It's the way people who've been inert in politics too long have a tendency to think. They just think about the numbers and not the people, and they really don't care about anything other than getting their guy elected.
Yeah, I mean, why would they?
So, like I said, we're gonna end up having more episodes of overtime as we keep up with what's. You weren't here for when this first happened, but the people who were, every night we aired and talked about what every single state in the union was doing as each was coming to its own and just locking down. And we're not quite there yet, but we're headed there. Wendell Potter, the former VP of corporate communications for Cigna, has come out now. And I think I'd mentioned this before. I do think, there are problems with the Canadian. There's problems with every healthcare system.
Sure.
In Scandinavia, okay, you know what? Yeah, the tax rate over there is about 45%. But the amount that you don't have to pay in insurance, the amount that you get to, once you have your money, it's yours. You don't have to do anything with it. I mean, there's the actual amount of their income that's disposable in the Scandinavian countries is higher than ours, because even though they pay more in taxes, they're much more efficient in being able to solve these. In A, getting 100% literacy rate. B, so they have a more educated, better workforce that can accomplish more, produce more. GDP is higher per person. It's insane. Anyways, I don't know. I wish more would be done with what Wendell Potter was saying. I don't know. Thoughts?
Lots of them. Right now, this year in the United States, we'll spend about $3 trillion on healthcare. That's what we spend right now. That is what employers pay to insurance companies, what employees pay as part of their premiums. That includes co-payments and other stuff. We spend about $3 trillion a year right now. Right now, that's what you spend. Now, it depends on which economist you talk to as to whether or not that's a fair number, right? Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders says that there's a lot of administrative overhead and that moving to a Medicare for all system would eliminate all of that overhead and the $3 trillion would pay for it. Elizabeth Warren, in her plan, said, I don't think so. Because one of the things that you're not factoring in is things like rural hospitals. Rural hospitals are billed differently by the insurance companies because the insurance companies know that rural hospitals have fewer doctors and fewer resources, and patients have to travel further to get to those hospitals. And in a Medicare for all plan, rural hospitals wouldn't survive, and so rural hospitals would have to be priced differently. It's one of the big differences between Bernie Sanders' Medicare for all plan and Elizabeth Warren's. And the truth is, no one knows what healthcare costs because a lot of the costs that you would need in order to calculate the numbers are protected by HIPAA, and you can't look at them, and no one can look at them. No one's allowed to know them except the insurance companies and the hospitals themselves, but they're not allowed to release them. So you have to do a lot of estimating. Congress themselves probably could if they put together the right committee and got the right clearances, but still a lot of the numbers would be done where we can't look at them. And then they would say, okay, well, here are our final estimates, but we wouldn't be able to look at the actual numbers. We legally can't because it would be HIPAA violations in a lot of cases. But $3 trillion is probably accurate. It's probably $3 trillion a year for our healthcare system to exist and survive right now. If we were tomorrow to switch over to Medicare for all, let's just pretend that it happened, what would you eliminate? Well, you'd be eliminating these health insurance companies, right? Those companies would go away. So those executives wouldn't have jobs. The people in their call centers wouldn't have jobs. Salespeople wouldn't have jobs. Vendor people wouldn't have jobs. But Medicare itself would have to expand. It would need more people in its call centers, and it would need more executives and stuff. So there would be some sort of transition from one to the other. It wouldn't be 100% transition. I'm not arguing that. Those jobs wouldn't
you're just
pay
being
as
fair
much.
with the numbers, but yeah, it's still
fair with the numbers.
There's going to be some duplicate, some redundancies.
Absolutely,
but it's not a one for one.
It's not a one for one, and the jobs that would be created, many of them wouldn't pay what those jobs pay right now, right? To a private company that's for profit. So the other part of it you would have to eliminate for-profit hospitals. You would not be able to have for-profit hospitals in a Medicare for all system because there's no Republican that's going to get behind the idea, maybe, of a hospital making money off of the government, right? So these for-profit hospitals, you'd have the same thing. You've got a bunch of executives and salespeople and stuff that work at these for-profit hospitals. Well, they've all lost their jobs. So in order to make a transition over to that system, you have to provide some sort of training for all of those. Well, how is that going to be paid for? Well, it's going to have to be paid for out of that $3 trillion, right? So the issue that we have is that the current for-profit system that provides our healthcare in this nation is so ingrained and is so systemic that transitioning away from it is going to be painful. Whether we do it over 4 years like Bernie wants to, whether we do it over 10 years like Elizabeth Warren wants to, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to hurt a big part of our economy. There's a lot of stocks that are traded every day on the stock market that have to do with these companies and these hospitals. Those would all go away. Those public companies wouldn't exist anymore. What's going to happen to your 401k if you're invested in those companies, at least partially? So, there's a lot of concerns with transitioning away. The other thing that we know is that our current healthcare system doesn't work, right? Yeah, everybody saw that guy that got the $1.1 million bill for his coronavirus treatment. Now, most of it was covered by the health insurance company. He doesn't owe $1.1 million. But the issue is that because we have a healthcare system that we have, fixing it's going to hurt. But the healthcare system we have doesn't work. So we either live with a broken system or we go through a whole bunch of pain to have a system that actually serves everyone. And I'm almost done. And I see the arguments for both. Okay. I've done a bunch of shows on this. You can go back on my channel and watch them anytime you want. I see the arguments for both, but I think that we have to recognize that a lot of the arguments made against Medicare for All were made by people like what's his name again?
Now I've forgotten. I had it written down.
He's from Cigna. Anyway,
Wendell Potter, former VP.
Potter.
Yep.
Wendell Potter, right. Many of the arguments were invented by health insurance companies because they don't want for-profit hospitals to go away, because they know that they're getting an inordinate amount of that $3 trillion as executives to put in their pockets. And they're like, what lie do I have to say to make sure that this money train don't end? And we are now at a reckoning. We are having a global pandemic, and we have an administration that doesn't care. And there's going to be a lot of very sick, very dead Americans. And the healthcare system that we have will not protect them, does not cover them. And we are at a very interesting time in our history as far as healthcare goes. I hope that Medicare for All is finally the answer on the other side. At the very least, we need a public option. I don't understand why we don't have a public option. Like, seriously, I don't understand why healthcare companies, you can't just go up to them and say, hey, I don't have a job right now, but can I give you money? Like, literally, you can't just go get health insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, you can through the marketplace and everything if you're unemployed. But I'm just saying, there are situations where you can have a job, not have health insurance through your employer, and you can't buy into a plan. That makes no sense to me. I can't see why that's not a thing, but there's a law of large numbers. There's a bunch of insurance reasons that I won't bore you with as to why they don't do that. Because essentially their argument is, well, the premium would have to be too high to justify it, which is bullshit, but that's what their bean counters have decided. Okay, I'm done now.
The U.S. ranks number one in healthcare expenses. We pay per capita more than any other country in the world for healthcare. Now, that's great. I think that's spectacular. Healthcare is an industry, and I think they should, I'm happy to give them my money. But I'd like to be in the top 2 or 3 of healthcare outcomes.
Sure.
We're going to get that.
Yeah.
And we're not.
Right.
We're not in the top 5 either. We're not in the top 10.
Nope.
We're not in the top 20. And we're not in the top 30 countries for healthcare outcomes. We are 34 of every country in the world. We rank 34th for healthcare outcomes, longevity, and life expectancy, and we pay more than any other country in the world. That's, I think, the definition of broken. It's broken. If we pay that much and we rank 30, something is wrong. And anyone who sits there and says, well, hey, but it's better for X, Y, and Z reason. Not if we rank 34th. It's not. It's just not. But somebody, Verillion, made this comment in the live chat. I remember this too because this did. When it was discovered that lead was toxic, there was a huge push against banning it from, in particular, gasoline. It used to be in gasoline. And the amount of damage that did, because you'd burn it and it would just go straight into and the scientists who came out and said, look, this is just the science. I'm not a politician. I'm just telling you what happens when you put it into the air. Were destroyed by corporations who wanted to still make the money from putting lead into gas, lead into paint, so on and so forth. Now, it eventually got, the argument was made, well, think of the industry. Imagine what you're going to do to the industry. And it's just that argument. And the one other argument, and I mentioned this one earlier, and I actually spent a lot of yesterday looking for this, and I couldn't find it. I want to find this guy. I doubt anyone here has heard of it. If anyone has, hit me up on the Discord or DMs or just put it into the. But there was a guy who was using one of those electric saws. I forget what it is, like a handsaw, and he cut off a finger. And he went to the hospital, got that. This isn't going quite where you think it's going. But afterwards, a company came up to him and said, we have this technology. And I've seen things on this technology. It's still out there. It hasn't been implemented yet. And he fought the implementation of this technology that could actually sense flesh in a saw and stop the saw. And you see them, they cut wood. No problem. Wood. They put a hot dog on a piece of wood. As soon as it hits the hot dog, this huge clamp just bam hits the blade, and it just cuts a little bit of the hot dog, and that's it. It stops right there. And it's so far it's basically bulletproof. It stops as soon as it hits human flesh. He fought against the implementation of this technology, and he said the argument he used, I wish I was kidding, was, well, if I want to cut off my finger, it's my right as an American. It was an accident. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about rights. And all of a sudden, somehow it becomes about rights. I have no idea how and why.
I'll go reread the 14th Amendment, but I don't think that's in it.
I don't think it's in it either. And he won on this argument. He's missing it, but because he actually lost a finger, but was fighting a proposed law requiring that this technology be installed on saws. It still hasn't been, and you can YouTube it. And I've seen the footage because I was looking for the interview with this guy again. And it's just like, no, I'm an American, and it's my right to cut off my finger if I want to. Nobody's trying to take that away from them. They're trying to take away having it happen by accident.
Right.
And it's the same thing that somehow the notion of during a global pandemic that has the ability to kill millions of Americans. Those are the numbers we're looking at if this thing really spirals out of control, which is it's headed in that direction. And people are making this about rights and the right to freedom, and your right to freedom does in fact end when you're killing other people. And if you yourself have been weaponized, the state does have the right to do. It's amazing. In times of an emergency, this isn't about rights, and this isn't about the economy. Because the economy will do better if we handle this right. And this is what I said during our first lockdown. I said, listen, if we do the lockdown correctly and we finish it, this isn't going to end for anybody until 70% of Americans have been infected with it. But if you flatten the curve, you can make it a lot less lethal, and you can drop the numbers and you can make it manageable. Yeah. That we gave up our opportunity to do that, and so we're going to learn our lesson the hard way, which is doing something right the first time is 10 times better than having to do it again. I don't want to have to go through another. I really don't want to have to go through another lockdown. I don't mind if you do.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well, I think that's enough cheeriness for one day. I do appreciate you coming by, Ethan. Thank you very much.
Of course.
It actually isn't a lot of fun to talk to, but I think it's important, and so we appreciate. Oh, Saw Stop. That's right. That is the technology is called Saw Stop. That's the exact one. But there was a guy and he had one of those red hand saws, and he cut off his finger. I just remember because he literally had on overalls. They weren't able to sew the finger back on. He lost it permanently. But he said he opposed the requirement that Saw Stop be installed on all machines because he thought that was an impingement on his right to cut off his finger if he wanted to, which of course belies the fact that he didn't want to. He wasn't trying to do that. The only reason I think about it is because it's an extreme example of what we're seeing. It's just completely unhinged from reality. But anyways, thank you. Tony sent me the URL for a Saw Stop. We'll have to take a look at that. Thank you, Tony. For the world's biggest troll, I certainly do mention his name a lot. I have no idea how.
I know, right?
I know, yeah. I've given up trying to avoid it. I should probably get back into that because he's winning ground. Oh, Kawesa for 10,001. Looking forward to the discussion on guns because, in my opinion, ultimately changing police behavior will come down to getting guns off the streets and giving no justification for brutal response. Actually, that's a really good point. Thank you, Kawesa, for your 10,001 super chat. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Yeah, that's the argument. People always tell me, "Oh, you're not against guns. You're just against the bad guys or certain people having guns. You don't mind that the cops do." No, I mind that the cops do. I mind very much, but they have to have them. They have to. I'm not going to sit there and say take the guns away from the cops, because you can't. If you're going to arm your criminals, you kind of have to arm the police. You just have to. But no, I'd like to have the. You think black people in this country want the police to be armed or not? Just let's take a poll. I'd like to see, but you can't disarm them to disarm the criminals. So, but thank you very much. It's just a talent.
Sorry. The toddler needed her charger for her tablet.
Oh,
sorry about that.
You're starting her young, just like mine. Mm-hmm. Mine. Oh God, they spent. Mine lost her Roblox account, and she spent a year on that. That's been a huge tragedy.
Oh, what a tragedy.
Yep. She actually worked on that account for a year. We're trying to get it back. We'll see. It's kind of my fault too, because there was a problem with the backup. Don't leave technology in the hands of Daddy, but she's the one who destroyed her iPod, so it's it works. Please do sub and subscribe to Progressive Liberal. He's been Prolib started as a correspondent on the show, meaning I would call him at 2 a.m. in the morning. It said, "There's breaking news, dude. Get off your ass." And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And what do you want? And he showed up. I don't know what possessed him, but he showed up. And now is co-host of Overtime. So, and we'll still try to get him onto the after show every now and then too. But please do go visit his channel, because he covers a lot of stuff like this better than I can.
Yeah, in fact, I want to promote something, because recently I interviewed the presumptive Green Party candidate for the United States presidency, Howie Hawkins. That's on my channel, and I think everybody should go watch it. It's short. I only had him for 15 minutes, unfortunately, but he goes through his history with the Green New Deal, which goes back about 45 years. He goes through his history of protesting, his feelings on Black Lives Matter, which I'm sure you can guess how that went. He's been getting arrested for 40 years of different protests. Very interesting guy, very interesting interview, and I encourage everybody to go watch it.
Oh, did Doorknob Head really just say, "I thought the police came with 2 arms"?
All right, I'm going now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before you do, I was tempted to just bail, just cut straight to the. Let's listen. If you're before we go, folks, if you like the show, please like and subscribe. That helps us out. But also, please go check out Ethan and check out that video. He does a lot of great work. Give him a like and subscribe too. That's a great way to help us, but it also helps him. And we would not have him here if we did not have confidence in what he does. So go check him out as well. And so I think I was going to make another joke, but I think I'll skip it. Thank you all very much, and look forward to catching you guys with some more bad news, I think, on the flip side. But stick with us, and we'll make sure you're as informed as we can make you. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.